السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. معكم الأستاذ أسامة من مجموعة الواتن الدولية. اليوم إن شاء الله حنستكمل درسنا في برنامج الأفتر إفكت. في الأسبوع الماضي أخذنا عن أساسيات التصوير والكاميرا. اليوم إن شاء الله والإضاءة أيضا. اليوم إن شاء الله راح نستكمل هذا الدرس، ولكن قبل هيك بدي أنوه عن شغلة في برنامج الأفتر إفكت. مبدئيا عندنا مثل احنا الواجهة اللي نحن متعودين عليها واللي بنعرفها هي واجهة العالم. حابين إن إحنا حاليا إنه آه، إذا إحنا حابين حاليا إنه مثلا نساوي نيو بروجكت مثل هذا شايفين هون فوق على اليمين. نعمل بروجكت عادي جدا مثل ما إحنا شايفين. خلينا ننزل هي بس لتحت شوي. تمام. نحن تعلمنا كم شغلة بالتوتوريال، فاليوم كمان حنستكمل درسنا شوي حنستكمل دروس التوتوريال عنها إن شاء الله. تمام. هاي أخذنا هذا التوتوريال، عم نشوف هذا التوتوريال هذا. بس خليه يحمل. اوكي لك حمل، خلينا ندوس عليه. قول له get started. خلينا نشوف عنا الفيديو بالاول. خلينا نعيده بس بالاول ونكبر اوكي. هو حاليا كان عم يشرح عن التمبلت ومش نستخدمها. نشوف عن التمبلت الجاهزة اللي عندنا. كمان نحن هلا حورجيكم كمان موقع جدا جميل، علشان إذا أنت حابب إنك تستخدم تمبلت جاهزة بيعرض لك إياها. هلا حنشوفها مع بعض. خلينا نفتح على جوجل بس ونفتح البرنامج هون. موقع هو مو برنامج. يسوي شير بس. تمام. هذا هو الموقع اللي بيسوي لك بيعطيك تمبلت جاهزة. طبعا أنا شرحته أنا بالبريمير، فراح أرد أشرحه هون بالأفتر إفكت عشان في له خصائص معينة بالأفتر إفكت. نحن ممكن نحتاجها هلا حنشوفها مع بعض. هذا البرنامج اسمه موشن أراي أو أراي. هذا الموقع بيحكي لك إنك شلون إذا أنت حابب إنك تستخدم مثلا تمبلت معين جاهزة من خلال هالموقع. في عندنا هون مكتوب عندنا شيء اسمه فيديو تمبلت، على اليمين عندنا بريسيت موشن جرافيك، عندنا هون فوتج، عندنا هون ميوزك، ساوند افكت، جرافيك، فوتو. عندنا كل هدول نحن نشرحهم واحدة واحدة ورح نشوف آه، مهمة كل واحدة شو هي. أول شيء عندنا التولز، خلينا نختار أول خيار عندنا هون. أوكي، أعتقد بده سوفت وير ولا شو مكتوب هون. خلينا نفوت أول شيء على الفوتو مثلا. طبعا هاي الفوتو عندنا هون فيك تستخدم مثلا، بيعطيك فوتو جاهزة فيك تستخدمها أنت للتصميم أو للفيديو تبعك. هون فيك على اليسار تسوي فلتر للصور انت بدك اياها، مثلا فاميلي، فود، هيلثي، اي شيء انت بدك اياه. خلينا مثلا نفوت على فاميلي. بيعطيك صور جاهزة هيك اشياء للعائلة مثلا. نحن شايفين هون هيك اشياء تدل او توحي او كناية على على العائلة. تمام. نكمل ننزل لتحت. بهذا الشكل في عندنا كثير صور. مثلا حابين نحن نستخدم هذا هي عندنا edition، يعني دراسة يعني. بيعطيك صورة عن الدراسة. مثلا خلينا نشوف فود اند درينك. كيف بيعطيك صور عن الدرينك وعن الأكل وعن الأشياء حلوة يعني. شوف مثلا هالصورة، مجرد صورة عادية يعني. هون بكون حاطين لك إنه هي جي بي جي وهي هوريزونتال. بحكي لك هون طولها وعرضها ومساحتها. هاي بالنسبة للصور. هون تحت في تحت بحكي لك شو، بحكي لك إنه هون أشياء نفس الصورة أو أشياء من نفس الفكرة الصورة اللي أنت اخترتها قبل شوي. مثلا حاطين لك هون الجمبري قاعد على مثلا على مثلا صح انه هون ليمون مثلا طعم عادي يعني. ونشوف هاي مكتوب نيو. اه انه بيخلي لك الإيديت تبعك شكله حلو. اوكي. هون عند الجرافيك، اشياء جرافيك انت ممكن انك تحتاجها في في الفوتوشوب. حاطين لك اياها هون بالفوتج، بالجرافيك اقصد. او مو بس بالفوتوشوب، بالإلستريتور، بالإن ديزاين كمان. برنامج واسع. فيك كمان تحت فوق. في عندك كمان فلتر هون، عندك هون الإلستريتور. فينا تضغط على الإلستريتور مثلا، بيعطيك اشياء جاهزه يعني الستريتور مثلا. عندك هون ايكون جاهزه. اوكي مثلا، مثلا خلينا نشوف هاي مثلا. خلينا نشوف مثلا في ترى موشن ايكون. تعال نكتب موشن ايكون. وين موشن ايكون؟ كيف كانت كلمه موشن ايكون؟ بس اعتقد ان ايكون. خلينا نشوف موشن ايكون. هو مثلا في هاي ايكون، هاي موشن ايكون مثلا بالافتر افكت. تمام. عندنا هون عندنا بالافتر افكت، فين ننزله مثلا؟ فين ممكن نحتاج وهذا مثلا اوكي، هذا فلات ايكون، واو هذا كثير حلو. خلينا نشوف مثلا هذا. والله اشياء جميله جدا. مثلا هلا في عندنا نزل نزلت نزل عندنا اول نزلناه قبل شوي، فقبل شوي نزلت. هلا ممكن احنا نشوفها. خلينا نشوف مثلا هذول. اه ففي كتير شغلات، خلينا مثلا نشوف اللي نزلناهم. هم اساسا بالافتر افكت. ممكن ان احنا ناخذ هي كلمه افتر افكت، ممكن ان احنا نحطها بمكان عشان اذا احتاجناها بعدين. هي اذا احتاجناها بعدين. هي بس عليها كبستين، استنى يحمل. يعني نفس هيك تقريبا، يعني في كتير حتى اشياء غير هي. كلها هلا نشوفها سوا. مثلا خلينا نشيل هاي مثلا عشان نكمل مع بعض ونشوف الشيء اللي بعده. ممكن إن نحن اوكي، هو لازم نسوي شير. اوكي خلينا نرجع مثلا على افتر اوكي افتر افكت سكر. خلينا نرجع مرة ثانية، افتح الافتر افكت عشان نكمل درسنا. اوكي بس خلينا نشوف مرة ثانية. وانا هلا سويت شير على افتر افكت عشان بس بدي افتح الدرس الثاني اللي هو عن الإضاءة. جدا الإضاءة مهمة عندنا. هذا هو يسوي شير بس.
cinematic composition,
أعتقد
cinematic
هلا إنه في صوت أعتقد.
lighting, and cinematic movement. Now, lighting is not only the most
هاي نحكي عن اللايتنج هلا.
overlooked aspect of filmmaking, but is also the #1 thing that will change everything about your projects. If you can learn lighting, you will up the production value like you have never seen before. And like I said, it's also the most overlooked aspect of filmmaking. I've actually seen filmmakers buy red cameras with no lighting, and their footage looks worse than someone with a T5i with great lighting. When people ask me to critique their work or ask me why their shot doesn't look as good as their competition, I
يعني مثلا شوف كيف الإضاءة، كيف هم يحكي هو قبل شوي يعني يقول. خلينا نرجع لورا
can use
شوي.
ask me to critique their work or ask me why their shot doesn't look as good as their competition. I can
يعني يسألون إنه ليش الإضاءة أحيانا بشوفوا مثلا إضاءة تحت كيف حلوة وجميلة، مثلا على اليمين في إضاءة لونها أزرق، على اليسار إضاءة لونها أصفر. هون ما في شيء، هون طالع إضاءة كتير عادية.
usually tell immediately that they either
شوف
didn't
شلون؟
have any lights or their lighting is really bad. Because of that reason, inside our full course, we have an entire 40 episode in depth lighting course taught by Josh Osley. Josh not only teaches all about lighting, but we follow along with him as he lights all types of different scenarios with expensive lighting to cheap lighting. Now, we've been selling our film course successfully for years with an $800 price tag and have had over 4,000 students. But right now, we're doing something we have never done before. We are running an insane sale of only $97. Our entire lifetime membership to our award-winning $800 film course for only 97 bucks. And I'm not joking. If you want to take advantage of this crazy deal, you can check out our website in the link below and head on over to tomorrowsfilmmakers.com to learn more. But in today's lesson, I want to give you the 8 steps that you need to take in order to have cinematic lighting. If you take these 8 steps, I promise you, your image will look 1,000 times better, even if you just have a cell phone.
هو عم يقول
And to show you
إنه
just how
حيعطينا 8 خطوات. إذا نحن طبقنا هاي ال8 خطوات حيعطينا إياها. هلا كمان حكي لكم إياها. راح نض- حن يعني حتكون أنت بروفيشنال بالإضاءة.
easy it is to get great lighting. I personally own many aperture lights and I use them for every single project. And in my opinion, aperture lights are some of the absolute best that you can buy. But for this entire episode, everything that you are seeing has been shot with cheap lights that anyone can buy. I'm using the Godox SL150, which is about $240
عملوا إنه هاي الإضاءة هي من أحسن وأرخص الإضاءات والكل فيه يشتريها. هي
bucks, and the Godox SL60 watt, which is only about 150 bucks. So I want to take a cheaper light and show you guys that you don't need crazy expensive lights to get cinematic lighting. All you have to do is follow these 8 steps and you will be shocked at the difference. Starting off with step number 1, and is actually one of the most important and also doesn't require any lights, and that is to shoot shadow side. Now, there are many different names for this, shooting negative fill side, short side, dark side, whatever you want to call it, but the idea of shooting shadow side is that whatever side your light is placed on, your camera needs to be on the other side of the subject. This might seem like something really simple, but you wouldn't believe the difference it makes, and you also wouldn't believe how many people don't do this. And I challenge you, go choose any movie off your shelf and try to find a shot that isn't on the shadow side of the subject.
عم يقول لما يكون الإضاءة على اليمين حيكون في على اليسار. خلينا نفتح مثال ثاني. خلينا نفتح البرنامج الدبلوم. هاي كمان خلينا نطلعها بس لفوق شوي عشان نعرف نتحكم. فهو عم يحكي
whatever
إنه
side
لما تكون الإضاءة على اليمين نفس هيك إجباري تكون الكاميرا على اليسار. هذا مهم جدا، وحتى عم يعطينا أمثلة على بعض الفيديوهات.
your light is
نشوفها
placed
بعض.
on, your camera needs to be on the other side of the subject. This might seem like something really simple, but you wouldn't believe the difference it makes, and you also wouldn't believe how many people don't do this. And I challenge you, go choose any movie off your shelf and try to find a shot that isn't on the shadow side of the subject.
عم يحكي إنه هو أي فيلم بتحبه تكون الإضاءة على اليمين، حتكون الكاميرا على اليسار.
It's really difficult because almost every shot in a movie is on the shadow side. Now, the reason they do this is because it gives a much more dramatic feel to the scene, it adds depth to the person's face, and also adds more of a three-dimensional element. It doesn't have to be like a really strong contrast where you can barely see the person's face. It could even be really subtle, like this frame. Even though there's a lot of light on our subject, the key light is coming from the other side of the person's face. If we take these two images, we can clearly see which one looks more cinematic. It's always going to be the one where there is more shadows on the subject's face. When I first started out, most of my filming was done on the key side, and it didn't look cinematic whatsoever. All of my interviews were done on the key side, and everything that I filmed was done on the same side that the light was on. One major secret that I learned over the years of filming is that if you want that cinematic look in your images and boost the production value of your films, simply move the camera to the other side of the light. With an interview, put the light on the other side. If it's a really simple shot and someone's literally writing on a calendar, step to the other side of the person's face. If you don't have any lights, just put the light source on the other side of the person's face, even if it's just the sun. You aren't going for like a silhouette look, just a cinematic look. Such a simple step can make such a difference in your production value. Step number 2 is lighting direction. The entire emotion of your project can change just by slightly moving the light in your scene. If you move the light too far up above your subject, you get more dark shadows underneath the eyes, and the person looks less trustworthy and more depressed.
I love Envato Elements because it is a one-stop shop for me as a content creator, so I can create videos in a
If you put the light too low, you will reverse the shadows on the face and the person will start to look like a villain. To get the most natural looking light on a person's face, you want to have the light at a 45-degree angle on their face, creating an upside down triangle on the subject's opposite cheek. This is known as Rembrandt lighting, named after the famous painter Rembrandt, who used this in almost all of his portraits. This lighting will keep those shadows on the face, but also give enough lighting on the other side to illuminate the eye and slight cheek definition. You'll also create a slight drop shadow under the chin, and it just looks natural. If you're setting up your lights, remember that the direction of the light is just as important as anything else. If you place the light at the wrong angle or position, too high, too low, it can result in an amateur image or even confuse your audience as to what they should be feeling. Just a slight movement can make such a difference. Step number 3.
هو لازم إنه أنت تحط الإضاءة بشكل مناسب لما تكون عم تصور الشخص من الأمام. إذا أنت رفعتها شوي للأعلى أو رفعتها شوي لتحت، أو إذا رفعتها شوي لفوق أو نزلتها شوي لتحت، ممكن هذا يختلف التصوير بنسبة 180 درجة ويطلع مو حلو. فلازم تخليها على زاوية 45.
3 is depth. Creating depth and separating your subject from the background is a necessity when filming. You do not want your subject to blend into whatever background they're in. You can create separation by shooting at a lower aperture, bringing your subject away from the background, but you can also add separation by lighting. And one way is with color. Now, like it or not, the orange and teal blockbuster look is very popular because of the color contrast. If the skin tones are very warm and orange, what is the opposite of orange on the color wheel? Blue. And blue complements orange. You see this all the time in movies, and not just in the Transformer movies. But by putting complementing colors in your films to separate your subject, you're not only going to make your film look more cinematic, but you're going to add separation from your subject and the background by having two different complementing colors.
يعني مولد أنت حابب إنك تخلي المشهد تبعك سينمائي أكثر، لازم تدمج اللونين مع اللونين الأزرق والأصفر، لأنهم بيعطوك سموث أكتر للمشهد.
in the same shot. And again, it doesn't have to be blue and teal, it could be any complementing colors. So if you have a very warm light on your subject's face, instead of putting another warm light in the background, put a complementing color like blue. Find complementing colors to add depth to your image. Another way to separate your subject is to simply have your background darker than your subject. If the background is brighter, it's going to be much harder for the subject to stand out. Simply bring down the exposure of the background to where the subject is brighter than what is behind him. It doesn't have to be super dark or super bright, but the formula that I use is brighter shirt, darker background, darker shirt, brighter background. You just want your subject to stand out from the background by most of the time being brighter than the background, but sometimes even being darker than the background by creating depth. Number 4 is motivated lighting. Nothing screams amateur more than unmotivated light. Now this is light that doesn't come from anywhere and just kind of appears in the scene. Motivated lighting means that in the scene, the lighting is coming from something in the room and the audience knows it. If we show a wide shot and there's no windows or anything around, and then when I cut to a close-up, there's a bunch of light on our subject, it just doesn't make any sense. Motivated lighting means that the audience knows that the source of the light is coming from something natural.
عم يقول إنه إذا أنتم حطيتوا إضاءة، مثلا خلينا نرجع شوي لهون. أنا عم يقول إذا حطيتوا إضاءة هيك بدون أي شيء، أي مصدر للإضاءة، حيطلع إنه الإضاءة ما بتعمل أي معنى. طب هاي الإضاءة منين جاية؟ فهو شو سوى
Lighting
هون؟
means
هو
that
شغل نار
in the
هون.
scene,
فلما
the lighting is
شغل نار
coming
هون مثل شايفين، لما شغل النار فهو إنه العقل الباطني قال إنه العقل الباطني الإنسان عرف إنه الإضاءة اللي على وجه الزلمة أو على وجه البنت هاي جاية من النار هاي. صحيح النار مو حقيقية، ولكنها بتعطي فقط طابع، أو بتعطي إيحاء، أو بتعطي نفس إنه عقلك الباطني لحاله بيفسر إنه الإضاءة هاي جاية من النار هاي، فلازم يكون في لكل إضاءة مصدر. فهو أعطى مثال تاني لهون. أنا فلما سوى هذا المشهد بين إنه الإضاءة هاي كلها موجود طالعة من الشباك هاي، بس لما هو قرب شوي لهون مثل ما احنا شايفين في كتير إضاءة. طيب هي إضاءة منين طالعة؟ فما إنه ميك نو سنس، ما بتعطي أي معنى. في كتير إضاءات وما لها الإضاءة هي ولا الإضاءات اللي وراها ما لها ولا مصدر، فإنه هذا الشيء مو حلو. فلازم لكل إضاءة مصدر، فلازم نبين الإضاءة والمصدر. تمام.
on our subject, it just doesn't make any sense. Motivated lighting means that the audience knows that the source of the light is coming from something natural. If we have a random light on our subject, it just looks unnatural. But if we simply turn on a lamp next to them, it looks like that key light is coming from the lamp, even though in reality, the lamp isn't really putting off much light and wouldn't be able to light up our subject's face like this. But by placing some sort of light source visible to the audience to see, we have created natural, motivated light. In this scene in Bigger Than Life, this harsh underlighting really does make the tension grow in the scene, but why on earth is there a light in the living room pointed up at them? So make sure you have motivated lighting in your scene. It doesn't have to be difficult, and it also doesn't need to put off any light onto your actual subject. It can be as simple as putting a really small lamp in the background. All you want to do is make sure the scene looks natural and that the audience knows where the lighting is coming from. In this scene from Silence, when these characters are having a deep conversation, there's a lot of side lighting on their faces. The only problem is that there is only one giant window in the entire room producing any light, and it's behind them. So how do we show motivated lighting? We have one wide shot showing light coming into the room and hitting the side of the wall over here. Once they show that, the side lighting doesn't seem out of place. Imagine if they didn't show that wide angle shot and it was just a giant window producing light into the room, and then we cut to a close-up and it's side lighting. It would make no sense. So whenever you're lighting a scene, if there isn't a natural reason for a light to be on the face, create one. Next is background lighting. This is something that many people tend to look over because how important it is to light your subject. But if you forget to light your background, your image will not look natural, and you run the risk of it looking like a stage play by having all the light on your subject and a completely dark background. And I'm not just talking about interviews. It's important to have some sort of background light for interviews, but in narrative filmmaking as well. Most times this can be achieved simply with just some practical lights. You can add a small lamp to the background if it isn't enough light, maybe add a little bit more light to brighten up a certain area if needed. You can also add some ambient light in the background by either pointing a light into the ceiling, pointing a light into a wall, into a room with lots of diffusion. Just add some sort of life to the background so that it looks natural and doesn't look like the subject was just lit by a stage and they completely forgot about the background. Take any movie or TV show and just imagine how a certain shot would look if there was no light in the background. This shot would be completely black behind our subject if it wasn't for that small light. Same thing with this shot. If it wasn't for those few candles, this shot would look unrealistic and look like it was filmed on a stage somewhere. Adding a few small lights to the background really make a difference. Next is time of day. And for those of you who don't know, the absolute best time of day to shoot is in golden hour. This would be the first hour of light when the sun is coming up and the last hour of light when the sun is going down. If you shoot with the sun directly overhead, no matter what.
والأفضل وقت للتصوير إضاءة الشمس هي إضاءة الساعة 6 صباحا وإضاءة الساعة
you
6
do, you're
مساء.
going to get an ugly look because the sun is casting harsh shadows
فعم يقولوا إنه لو أنت صورت الساعة 12 حتطلع المشهد جدا بشع نفس هيك.
under the eyes, and it's the same as putting a light directly above your subject. During
شوفوا كيف هون.
golden hour, there is no harsh shadows and the light is much more appealing. Now these three shots were taken at the same day, one at 7 a.m., one at 12 p.m., and the other at 7 p.m. If you were to
عم يقولوا إنه هذه 3 مشاهد. شوفوا المشهد الأول على اليسار مشهد الساعة 7 الصبح، على اليمين مشهد الساعة 7 بالليل، وفي
at
النص
the
مشهد الساعة
same day,
12.
one at
بس لو بنلاحظ كيف المشهد تبع الساعة 12
shadows and the light is much more appealing.
جدا
Now
بشع.
these three
شوف كيف إضاءة جدا بشعة مو ظابطة أبدا.
shots were taken at the same day, one at 7 a.m., one at 12 p.m., and the other at 7 p.m. If you were to choose which one looks the best, it would be an easy choice. It would be the first one and the last one. And all I did was shoot at a certain time of day. Personally, during golden hour, I like to put the sun behind my subject and shoot into the sun. This will not only give you a very cinematic look, but will also give you beautiful lens flares. And if you plan accordingly, you can sometimes capture lots of detail in the sky when the sun is starting to go down. Shooting any other time will result in a blown out sky, but choosing to shoot during golden hour will increase the cinematic quality of your films immediately. Next is a catch light, or an eye light. And this is the reflection of the source of light in your subject's eyes. Now, most people don't really think about this, but a catch light or an eye light gives your subject life. It gives them a soul. It makes them feel alive. They even put white spots in the eye of an animated character to make them feel alive. Yet those older animations that don't have that white spot feel dead and lifeless and like a shark. Some filmmakers have actually used this to communicate life and communicate death. In King Kong, when Kong dies at the top of the Empire State Building, that eye light fades away. Now, this wouldn't happen in real life, but like I said, the eye light is what makes people feel alive. So whenever they remove that, you know as the audience that he's dead. In The Grey, when Liam Neeson finds himself surrounded by wolves, there is no light in his eyes because he's accepting his fate. But when he decides to fight to the death, that eye light comes back. Life in the fight for survival has been given back to him.
أقول اللون الأبيض اللي موجود على العين هذا بيعطي حياة للون، بيعطي حياة للمشهد. فعم يقول عم يوضح بهالمشهد إنه قبل شوي لما كان نرجع شوي لورا.
Light in
عم
his
يقول إنه هون ما في ضوء أبيض، ما في ضوء أبيض. ليه؟ لأنه هو كان عم يحس أو كان المشهد عم يقول إنه هو خلص راح يموت. فهم شالوا اللون الأبيض.
eyes
قدم
because
شوي.
he's accepting his fate. But when he decides to fight to the
فلما قرر
death,
إنه
that eye
يواجه الموت،
light comes back.
الإضاءة البيضاء رجعت من جديد.
Life in the fight for survival has been given back to him and communicated to the audience by having a reflection in his eye. With all that being said, just make sure that when you're lighting your subject, you can see that eye light. And if you can't, try moving the light around just a little bit to get that slight reflection. And finally, step number 8 is texture. Now, like it or not, fog and haze completely change lighting. One shot might look okay, but adding just a little bit of haze and a little bit of fog, and it looks like you've just purchased thousands of dollars worth of lights and maybe even upgraded your camera. And that's what I love about fog. It's something so simple, yet can completely change your image. And at the same time, nobody is using it. It doesn't make sense. Now, one little trick that I learned with haze that's amazing is that if you're wanting to get fog outside, it's really difficult and it's really expensive. But not if you use an insect fogger. On Amazon, you can buy these foggers that are meant to repel insects. What you're supposed to do is put insect repellent in it and then spray a giant mist on everything to kill a bunch of bugs. Well, instead, if you use mineral oil or fog juice, it turns an insect repellent into an incredible outdoor fog machine. Now, I would never use this indoors because it's just way too powerful, but outside scenes now look incredible with a simple bug repellent. And of course, I'll have all the links to these in the description below. So now that we know the 8 steps, let's take all of these steps and put them together to
هو هلا عم يقول انه اخر خطوه اللي هي الفوق، والفوق اللي هو الضباب. يقول انه اذا انت حابب انك تسوي ضباب داخل البيت فهذا الشيء عادي. يمكن انك تشتري انت اي آلة ضباب $100 رخيصه او اقل من $100، $20 $30. ولكن انت بدك تشتري او بدك تسوي ضباب خارج المنزل. اذا انت عندك مشهد بدك تسويه خارج المنزل وبدك تسوي ضباب، بدك آلة ضباب كبيره وهي كثير غاليه. فهو اعطانا حل بديل اللي هو اداه بخ الصراصير. بس هو ما راح يحط ما راح يحط الدواء مشان تطلع الريحه، هو بس بيحط المي مشان المي يتحول لضباب او يتحول لبخار. فبالتالي سوى الضباب باداه جدا رخيصه وبمفعول جدا كبير. فهلا عم نقول انه احنا بعد ما عرفنا الثمان شو بيسموها الثمان خطوات، هلا لازم نحطهم كلهم مع بعض ونشوفهم كلهم سوا.
to make one beautiful cinematic shot. Now,
Hi designers! Do you know Kohom? For those of you who don't know, Kohom is
here is our scene. We have our subject.
فعنقول هو انه بعد ما عرفنا الثمان خطوات راح نحطهم كلهم بمشهد واحد علشان نحن نشوف كيف حيطلع عندنا المشهد. هذا مشهد بدون اي خطوه من الخطوات اللي احنا تعلمناها. خلينا نشوف.
A chair playing the cello. And if we add a light to our subject, it looks fine. I mean, it's fine, it's passable, and this is where many filmmakers would actually stop. But let's take these steps and I'll show you the difference. Our first step is shooting shadow side. Now the light right now is on the key side of our subject's face. So we need to move the light to the other side of his face, which puts us on the shadow side. Number 2 is lighting direction. As you can see, even though we're on the shadow side, it's still pretty frontal lighting. So let's move the light to a 45-degree angle to get that Rembrandt lighting on our subject's face and
طبعا
add
اول
more
خطوه اللي
shadows.
سويناها هي انه حطينا الضوء، حطينا الكاميرا بمكان الوين، بمكان الشادو او بمكان الظل. ما بنحط الكاميرا بمكان الاضاءه، لا بنحطها بعكس مكان الاضاءه اللي هو مكان الظل.
3, 4, and 5 is motivated lighting, backlight, and depth. And I placed all of these together because each one is kind of necessary for the other. First, we need to motivate our key light. So let's simply take a lamp and place it on the same side of our subject and on the same side of our key light. Now the key light is motivated by the lamp in the back. This is also lighting up our background a little bit as well and separating our subject. Next is the background. And even though the lamp is helping a little bit, I do want something on the other side. So we're actually going to turn on the fireplace over here. And even though it isn't really giving off much light at all, it's adding some interesting element to the background. And not only is it an interesting element, but it's also adding some depth by creating a color contrast. But let's add even more color contrast though by motivating some light from the fire. We're going to add an orange light to the right side of our subject to look like it's coming from the fire. And again, not only is this light motivated by the fire, but it gives us a really great contrast from the LED key light on our subject's face. And continuing with the background, I really don't like this random door here, and I also don't like the dark window. So we're gonna add another light outside of the window shining inward. This brightens up the background, separates our subject, and also adds some cool texture from the blinds to the left side of the frame. And then finally, let's add some haze. And not only does it soften the overall look of the entire image, but look what it does to the window. Amazing. The first image we did doesn't look horrible because our subject is lit well and many filmmakers would probably be satisfied with this. But by taking these 8 steps, you can change an acceptable image into a cinematic image, all by using cheap lights and a $30 fog machine from Amazon. So thanks again for watching. If you'd like to learn
فهاي هي الثمان خطوات اللي عندنا. خلينا نراجعها مع بعض سوا. أول شيء نحن لازم الخطوة الأولى إنه نحط الكاميرا عكس مكان الإضاءة، لأنه إذا إحنا حطيناها مع مكان إضاءة ما راح يكون المشهد سينمائي. ثاني خطوة اللي هو الإضاءة. خلينا نرجع لورا. الإضاءة اللي هي على اليسار، إنه نحن نعطي مثلا حاطين نحن إضاءة على اليسار، فنحن بدنا نعطي مصدر لهالإضاءة. فهو حط شو راح حط اللمبة هاي. فلما حط اللمبة هاي عطى مصدر الإضاءة، فأعطى واقعية. بعدها راح حط إضاءة جدا خفيفة وراه اللي هي إضاءة النار. بس بعد ما حط إضاءة النار طلعت إضاءة عادية هيك، فراح حط شوية إضاءة برتقالية، فأعطاها شوي واقعية أكثر، وأعطاها كونتراست أكثر للمشهد. بعد ما سوى هذا الشيء راح وعطى شوية إضاءة من ورا من عند الشباك. هي أساس الشباك هذا مو شباك، هاي إضاءة. هو شباك بس هي إضاءة، مو إضاءة شمس، إضاءة عادية يعني إضاءة ضوء. فبعد ما حطها طلعت أفضل وأفضل. بعدين راح حط فوج أو راح حط ضباب، فطلع مشهد خرافي. فهي هي الثمان خطوات اللي عندنا. هاي ناخذ بريك سريع ونرجع لكم. السلام عليكم. نرجع من جديد. شوف نحن كنا ثواني بس خليني أسوي شير سكرين على أفتر إفكت عشان إحنا نرجع نشوف الفيديو اللي بعد بدنا نحضر لكم إياه. في فيديوهين لأن
Before forward, I didn't have a map or a goal for my career. I was doing a lot of different things, but was
هذا
is
الجزء
part
الثاني.
3 in our cinematic trilogy.
خليني أحطه بس في النت. الماوس.
Cinematic composition, cinematic lighting, and cinematic movement. Now, you might not know this, but if you move the camera at all, you communicate something to your audience. And every movement of the camera communicates a message and an emotion to your audience. So we have to determine exactly how to take advantage of that and use every single moment and every single movement to deliver the right emotion. Now, this video is not a video on every single type of camera movement, like a push in or a pull away or a crane shot, etc. We have episodes all about that in our full course, but this video is about the 8 steps that you need to take in order to create cinematic movement. And because of that reason, inside our full course, we have 2 entire cinematography courses, one taught by Chris Kimlin and the other taught by Josh Osley. Both of these courses together will teach you everything you could possibly need to know about cinematography and lighting. And you can learn more about that inside our full course at tomorrowsfilmmakers.com. Now, we've been selling our film course successfully for years with an $800 price tag and have had over 4,000 students. But right now we're doing something we have never done before, and we are running an insane sale of only $97. Our entire lifetime membership to our award-winning $800 film course for only $97. No joke. If you want to take advantage of this crazy deal, you can check out our website in the link below and head on over to tomorrowsfilmmakers.com to learn more. But today I want to give you the 8 steps you need to take in order to have cinematic movement in your projects. If you take these 8 steps, I promise you, your projects will look 1,000 times better, even if you just have a cell phone. Starting off with the very first step that will improve your projects faster than you can imagine is to avoid handheld. Nothing screams amateur more than seeing some handheld footage in someone's filmmaking. Now, some projects require more of a handheld look for more grittiness and a certain style, but not the handheld that we're talking about. This kind of handheld should never be used in your filmmaking career. And this is probably the most common mistake I see filmmakers make who are either just starting out or really just don't really know how to film properly. They grab their camera, click record, and start filming. I did it when I was starting out, and you probably did too. You see, the point of your project is to make the audience forget that they're looking through the lens of a camera. You want them to get sucked into the project and think that they're just watching this unfold in front of them. But if you pick up your camera and start shooting with this jittery handheld look, it's just a constant reminder to the audience that there is a cameraman holding the camera. And to be honest, no movement looks better than bad handheld movement. Putting your camera on a tripod is going to look better than a handheld shot, especially if you try to move the camera. Trying to pan left or right while holding the camera looks crazy amateur, but if you try and
طبعا هو أنا بحكي إنه إذا أنت حابب إنك تسوي إنك تصور شيء أو شيء لقطة أو شيء مشهد، انسى إنك تصور بإيدك، لأنه مثل ما هم نعرف بعض الهواتف القديمة أو مو القديمة، إنه اللي نحن عنا إياها ما فيها معنى اهتزاز. مثلا في آيفون 13 14 15 هذول فيهم معنى اهتزاز، فهذول لو صورت فيهم من خلال إيدك حيطلع مشهد حلو. اوريدي التليفون تبعك بيدعم هاي الخاصية، خاصية عدم الاهتزاز. فبالتالي عم يحكي لك إذا تليفونك ما بيساعدك تستخدم معنى الاهتزاز، ينصح إنك أنت إنك تجيب ترايبود. في كتير ترايبود عن إنه مشهورة في تركيا مثلا أو في أي مكان، لأنها مثلا إنه في مثلا أنواع رخيصة وجودتها جدا جدا عالية. أنا عندي واحد إن شاء الله إذا جينا على اجتمعنا بالمركز، بجيبه معي وبورجيكم إياه. آه، فنعم، فبنصحكم إنه أنتم لا تصوروا فيك، إذا صورتوا بيتكم كله إنه تحطوا مال عليه.
World of a difference. But even if you're not panning or doing anything like that, just having your camera stationary on a tripod with good composition looks better than bad, jittery, shaky handheld movement. When I was starting out, I used to film everything handheld. And then when I learned not to do that anymore, the production value in my projects increased significantly. I didn't buy a new camera, I didn't buy new lights or even a stabilizer. Yet the quality difference is huge just by me not holding my camera anymore. If you know that you need to film handheld for certain projects or a certain style, prepare for it with a shoulder rig or a camera cage to take away all those small jitters, but just picking up the camera and filming, avoid it like the plague. Because if you avoid it, you will improve the quality of your filmmaking instantly. Step number 2 is zooming, and why to never do it. A push in and a pull away are where you physically move the camera, but a zoom, on the other hand, is where you zoom your camera towards the subject. Now, the problem with a zoom and actually filming the zoom is that it feels very artificial and reminds the audience that there is a camera present. Now, some projects are great for zooms, like The Office. The Office is a TV show that's supposed to be about a documentary team following these people around in their daily lives. And since you already know that, zooms don't feel out of place because you're watching it through someone who is following them with a camera. The Bourne movies are also a good example. Paul Greengrass zooms all the time because it's about a man constantly on the run from the government, and he gives the feeling that someone is always watching him. But whenever you zoom, it reminds the audience that there is a cameraman holding the camera, and for that reason, it tends to take the audience out of the moment and reminds them that they're watching a movie or watching a promo or watching whatever project that you're making. When your character is supposed to be alone with nobody around and your camera zooms, it feels like you're watching a reality TV show. Zooming in on your projects should be avoided at all cost. And when you first pick up your camera, you're going to be tempted to do two things: go handheld and zoom. I've seen it countless times, and that's why I made a point to say no handheld and no zooms, because avoiding these two things will improve your projects. Number 3 is smooth movements. If your camera movements aren't smooth, the cinematic quality of them will be completely gone. Invest in a stabilizer, please. You can't get smooth movements without something to make your camera smooth. And also, just because you have a gimbal or a glide cam doesn't mean you will automatically have smooth footage. I see many filmmakers purchase gimbals and glide cams but still have shaky movement, and they ask me how to fix it, and the truth is it's because they just don't know how to use it. And there are 2 quick ways to make sure that your shots are smooth whenever you're using a gimbal. Number 1 is to balance your gimbal. With a glide cam, if it's not balanced, it's going to be impossible to film with, but with a gimbal, even if it's not balanced, it's going to look like it's ready to go. And because of that reason, many people are not getting smooth shots. Be sure to take that extra time and balance your gimbal and your glide cam properly. And number 2 is the way you walk. Getting smooth shots does depend on how you walk. You must bend your knees and walk like your lower half is completely separate from your upper half. Let your legs absorb everything without letting it get to your upper half. This is especially useful when moving quickly or running, since you tend to have more movement in your shots. Mentally, you have to train yourself to naturally squat when you walk because you aren't used to doing that. This shot was taken on a gimbal while walking normal. It doesn't even look like it's on a stabilizer, and that's because it all depends on the way you walk. Number 4 is depth. Many times, if we're moving our camera, we can tell that the background is moving, but we aren't really able to see just how much we're moving, especially if it's a wider shot. One way to create depth and show your movement better is to simply put something in your foreground to show that movement. It adds an entirely new level to our movements and allows us to have lots of depth. We already talked about this a little bit in our composition episode, but both of these shots are moving from left to right, but the one with a foreground object looks much more appealing by adding depth and also shows us as an audience how much we are moving. And it doesn't have to be anything large like a person or an object. It could be something small like leaves, plants, coming from behind something to reveal the subject. Many things you can do to add depth. But placing something in front of your camera to either shoot through or move around can greatly affect the cinematic quality. It adds depth, it adds another element to your image, and if your subject is on a flat wall and you can't move him away from that wall, the best thing to do to add depth is to put something in the foreground. It takes the image to an entirely new level. Next is motivated movement. Now, just like we talked about in our lighting episode with motivated lighting, now we have motivated movement. This is movement that is motivated by something else in the frame. Now, some movements just look fine out of the blue, but some movements can seem jarring and take your audience out of the moment if the camera just moves for no reason. Motivated movement will completely fix this. If we're going to move from one person to the other, instead of just moving back and forth, which can seem jarring, we could follow another person to our destination. This is what is called motivated movement. They use this many times in longer takes, and it really adds a lot. Sometimes the person's only job in the scene is to allow the camera to somewhat follow them, even if they're just in the background. Think if we had this shot without the person walking to move the camera. The movement would just seem jarring and out of place for the camera to just move with no real reason. As an example, if we have two people having a conversation, instead of moving back and forth to where it kind of feels awkward and out of place, we could have them tossing a ball back and forth and following the ball. This feels much more natural because the movement is motivated. And you don't necessarily need to focus on the ball when it's moving and make it a subject in the scene, but just move in the direction with it and it will seem more natural. If there wasn't motivation for the movement, it would feel out of place. I've also used motivated movement many times with real estate shoots. Instead of just walking in a room to show how nice it is, or especially the front door, we simply follow somebody into that room and have them walk out of the way, and it feels more natural to the viewer because the movement is motivated. So if you can, add some sort of motivated movement to your shots and you will be amazed at the difference it makes. Next is minimize rack focusing. Now, what is a rack focus? A rack focus is when your focus is on something really far away, and then you rack the focus wheel all the way until you focus on something really close, or vice versa. This has been used in Hollywood for ages and can be used in your projects to communicate a message. The reason I'm making a point about this is because back in the day, racking focus was pretty much impossible without some sort of adapter. Right when DSLRs came out, racking focus was super easy and available to everyone. So guess what everyone did, myself included? We were racking focus at every chance we could because we hadn't been able to do it before. And then it started to get monotonous and constant. So when you first pick up your DSLR and you're first getting into filmmaking, you'll have a tendency to want to do that all the time because it looks so cool. I mean, a typical Hollywood movie might have maybe one rack focus shot in the entire film, so I know it might seem like a small and simple step, but I've seen it over and over again where beginning filmmakers rack focus with almost every single shot just because they can and it looks cool. So please don't do it. Next is to shoot for the edit. We talked about this before in our top gimbal tips and tricks videos, but one of the most popular things right now are cinematic transitions, especially with a gimbal. It is everywhere. But if you're wanting your transitions more cinematic, you'll need to plan them out beforehand. Don't just start filming and think that you'll add some preset transition in the edit. Use your gimbal to create those cinematic transitions. If you're wanting to do a whip pan transition, start your shot and at the end of the take, pan quickly to the left. Then on your next gimbal shot, start with panning quickly to the left and then ease back into normal. With one, end with a pan. With the other, start with a pan. Once in the edit, you can blend those shots together seamlessly because you planned it out beforehand. If you didn't plan it out and just decided to add a preset transition, it doesn't look nearly as good as if you planned it out beforehand and actually moved the camera. So take your gimbal, your stabilizer, or whatever it is, and film your shots with your transitions in mind. And finally, step number 8, and probably one of the most important. Plan out your movements before you press record. Like I said at the beginning of the video, every movement communicates a message. And if you want cinematic movements in your projects, you need to know what emotion you want to communicate before you move the camera. If you just show up with your camera and do all these crazy moves for no reason, the audience will be confused. Handheld may communicate tension and anxiety, while a tripod shot may communicate calmness and control. If you use a jittery handheld shot at the wrong time, the audience can feel confused as to what you're trying to communicate. Before you ever start filming, determine what emotion you want, and that will determine what camera movement you need. And the reason I'm putting this step in this video is because if you really do want cinematic movements in your projects, they don't just fall into your lap. You have to plan them out and determine what movement you odd movement in teach all about that directing.
تمام، لهون بيكون انتهى درسنا. إن شاء الله تكونوا استفدتوا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.